What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so I did a poll on Twitter, which for those of you guys who were new, you can find me on Twitter at Comics Explained. I did a poll on Twitter and I asked you guys, who should the next character that we do a Too Powerful for the MCU be about? And I listed the Sentry, the Void, and then the Marquis of Death and Protege was the fourth one that we did. But the Void won. Now, in reality, the Void and the Sentry kind of go hand in hand. I mean, they're basically the same person. So I don't really know how you separate the two. So this will be a discussion that's akin to like the Molecule Man and the Beyonder, right? I mean, they're basically the same thing. So for those of you guys who don't know, the Sentry goes back to the year 2000. And in fact, the Sentry miniseries is my favorite comic book story of all time. Like, it's my absolute favorite. In fact, Sal over Comic Pop was at, he was at a Comic-Con. I can't remember which one he was at, or maybe it was a comic book store, but he found the whole collection of the Sentry, the original series by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee, and the one-shots, and sent it all to me. And I was like, I need to repay in kind. And so I sent him, I bought a hand-drawn picture of Spider-Man, or Tom Holland as Peter Parker, and sent it off to him. I was like, yeah, you kind of deserve this. But yeah, okay, so the way the Sentry and the Void originally appeared back in Marvel Comics was in the year 2000. And the idea was that Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee had this concept where they wanted to pretend like there was a superhero from like the 1960s that was forgotten. Like, it was a forgotten superhero made by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby that just kind of went under the radar, was swept under the rug, or whatever the case may be. And so you ended up getting the Sentry. What was told here is that it was just a guy named Robert Reynolds. Like, in the first issue, it looks like he's crazy. Like, right up to the end of the first issue, it seems like he's crazy because like he seems like a schizophrenic. He wakes up hearing voices, he starts seeing things that aren't there, the dog starts talking to him, he attacks the dog when the dog turns into the Void, and then his wife Lindy freaks out and she believes like he succumbed to alcohol again and then leaves him. And so it's basically just like Robert Reynolds is there, and he seems like he's absolutely insane. Well, like he's talking about stuff like, I need to go back to being a hero and I have to wake up the Sentry, and like, you know, I need to go back and get my powers back. He takes like a sheet, like some kind of bed sheet, and sticks it to his back. And you're just like, wow, this guy's bonkers. And then at the end of the first issue, he flies, and you're just like, holy cow, this guy is really a hero. And what you end up learning is that before the Fantastic Four, before the X-Men, before Spider-Man, before any of those guys, there was the Sentry. And the Sentry was just this guy who had consumed a serum that was modeled after the one originally given to Captain America, but 1,000 times more powerful. And what it did is it basically just like, it gave him like almost these godlike abilities, like insane levels of strength and speed and durability and all that kind of good stuff. And he went forward as a superhero. And because of the actions of the Sentry as a superhero, that's what inspired like Reed Richards and Susan Storm and Peter Parker and like Bruce Banner when he became the Incredible Hulk. That's what inspired like all of them to become heroes, was the Sentry. Well, somewhere along the line, the Sentry just vanished off the face of the earth, and nobody remembered him. Nobody knew what ever happened to him. He was just gone. It was like he never existed. What ends up happening is Robert Reynolds starts traveling around to like the Fantastic Four, into the X-Men, into like the Incredible Hulk. The only one who remembers him, he starts calling him Golden Man. He goes to see like Spider-Man and all these different characters and says like, you have to remember who I am. And so ultimately it's revealed that what had happened was, with the Sentry came the Void, which is basically like the evil dark persona of Robert Reynolds. And following this, like with the Void's first appearance, the Void killed like 1 million people in New York and almost destroyed the entire city. And so the Fantastic Four realized Robert Reynolds is the Void, and there ended up being this kind of device that was created that was on top of Avengers Tower. I think it was Avengers, maybe it was Baxter Building, but it was on top of like one of the superhero buildings. But what it did is it basically emitted a constant pulse that shut down everyone's recollection, that basically like stripped away everyone's memories of the Sentry. And so when they reactivated it because the Void's coming back, then the Void comes back. And so of course, you know, they end up like fighting against it, and it's kind of crazy because like the Void is like the only thing the Incredible Hulk's really been scared of. At least that's how it was at the time. So the Void returns, all the superheroes end up facing off against it. They manage to momentarily defeat it, and that's when Robert Reynolds realizes that so long as he's the Sentry, the Void will always be there. And so they go back to the tower, they end up reactivating the device, and ultimately everybody goes back to forgetting who the Sentry is. Now, this was published as part of something called Marvel Knights. Those of you guys who don't know what Marvel Knights is, if you go through and look at various Marvel comics that were in like the late 1990s, specifically like Daredevil, Black Panther was another good one. You start looking at those, you'll see like Marvel Knights written in white with a black banner at the top, and then you'll see like the title of the character. The reason why was because in the mid-1990s, when Marvel almost went broke, it was cheaper to take the characters that just weren't selling and just like outsource them to outside publishing houses and have them write the stories, and then it gets published by Marvel. And there was a company that was called Event Publications, which was owned by Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada, and they were the ones who basically published the Marvel Knights line. And so when Joe Quesada was made editor-in-chief of Marvel, he basically took all the Marvel Knights, all the concepts that were created as part of Marvel Knights, and then rolled them over. And so in 2005, 2006, when Brian Michael Bendis launches New Avengers, you end up getting the Sentry, who makes an appearance at the end, and then you get the second story, who is the Sentry, which is the New Avengers run. You actually find that video down in the description. But with that story comes one of two of the Sentry's most powerful wonderful displays. During the whole story of who is the Sentry, right? Like at the end of New Avengers Volume 1, which is called Breakout, you basically have Robert Reynolds who's there. Like they go in there and they're like, we don't know who this guy is. We've never heard of him before. And he actually can find himself there. And what you end up finding out is that Robert Reynolds exists in the main Marvel universe. And I can't remember exactly how Bendis rolled him in. It was kind of confusing and weird, but he essentially escapes. He just basically takes off and escapes. And through like a weird series of circumstances, basically the Void returns and the Void starts to go on a rampage. And so what ends up happening is like the combined forces of the X-Men, the Avengers, and the Fantastic Four all band together and go to the house of Robert Reynolds. Now, this is what made the Void so powerful. All those teams, Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and I mean like a full roster of the X-Men, all the most powerful superheroes in the Marvel universe on Earth could not stop the Void. That the Void was able to take on a combined, like all of them at the same time. And in reality, it took like Robert Reynolds stopping the Void. There was no way the superheroes could have defeated him. And that concept was continued on when you got to Siege. Now, Siege was a story, and it was a really, really good story. Siege was a story about the destruction of Asgard. A little bit of backstory here. So there were a lot of things that led up to the events of Siege, right? Like you have Thor Ragnarok, which is basically the death of Odin's son. And then following the death of Odin's son, going into the aftermath of Civil War, Odin's son comes back. And because of the fact that Asgard and like all the Asgardians in it had basically been destroyed during the events of Ragnarok, Thor starts traveling around the world trying to wake up their spirits that are stuck inside physical bodies. Well, before all of that, he rebuilt Asgard in Broxton, Oklahoma. And so it's literally just like hovering above the ground by like a foot or something along those lines. And then of course, with the restoration of the Asgardians and so on and so forth, they all take up residence in Broxton, Oklahoma. They all take up residence in Asgard. And that goes into the events of Dark Reign. And Dark Reign was the aftermath to Secret Invasion, right? Like where the Skrulls basically were replacing all the Earth superheroes. But with Iron Man being director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and not knowing that Secret Invasion was happening, he was basically kicked out. And then Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, was put in his place. And because he was a bad guy, he did what bad guys do. He basically like dismantled S.H.I.E.L.D., brought in a whole bunch of supervillains. And so with that happening, most of the superheroes all went underground. This led to the formation of the Dark X-Men, the Dark Avengers, basically like villains playing the roles of superheroes. And so during that time, Norman Osborn looked to consolidate all of his power. And so what he did is originally like he tried to capture the X-Men. They all took off. They went off to this island called Utopia off the coast of San Francisco. And then like Norman Osborn went to go attack Asgard and brought in like the Sentry and all that kind of stuff. Well, during this whole conflict, the Sentry like basically unleashes the Void, right? Like the Void is unleashed and totally obliterates Asgard, like destroys all of Asgard in its entirety. I mean, crushes the whole place, and it's all brought crashing down. Around that same time, Loki tries to find a way to defeat the Void, and Loki's killed in the process. So like the Void was killing gods. I mean, it's crazy how powerful he is. Now, like the Void is not all powerful, right? I mean, there is a what if story. It's what if Siege. And it's like, what if the Void hadn't been defeated? And basically the Void killed all the superheroes on Earth and then ascended into the universe and then destroyed the universe. And like, that was basically it. But those are what if stories. They're not really in continuity. And so you can kind of say, sure, that could happen, but it would be like if an alternate reality version of you became president. It doesn't mean you're actually president. It just means an alternate reality version of you is president. And so with that in mind, the Void has consistently been considered one of the most powerful villains out there, and depending on the circumstance can be considered like in like the top 3. The problem with this is that the Void has largely been an earthbound character, but aside from like the Molecule Man, Franklin Richards, Matthew Malloy, Shepard, there aren't really that many people on Earth who are universe level powerful. There's a few, but you can count them on like 2 hands. The Sentry, depending on the circumstance, can be that powerful, but if we're talking about like a universal constant, which is to say like they can intrinsically control the fundamental forces of the universe, then you got Franklin Richards, you have Clyde Wincham, you've got Shepard, you've got the Molecule Man Owen Reese, the Beyonder, which is essentially kind of an earthly character. Yeah, no, that's about it in terms of vast reality warping powers. There might be a couple obscure characters that I'm leaving out there, but again, like we've never seen the Void transcend Earth. I mean, there was a what if story where it did, but we never saw what happened. But like we've never seen the Void fight Galactus. We've never seen the Void fight the Silver Surfer. We've never seen the Void fight, Thanos or Franklin Richards. And because we haven't seen it, it's hard to gauge his power. So we haven't really seen the Void fight characters like that. So it becomes a tough sell when you're talking about the Void versus like these cosmic beings. But having said that, the question becomes, this is really the $1 million question, why could the Void not work in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Well, the reason for this is really, it's pretty simple and it's twofold. The first is the fact that the Void is the opposite of order. The Void is chaos. And the second is the amount of power the Void possesses. So when you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it really is just ordered and structured. It's about as far from what you would normally expect to see in a comic book in the Marvel comics as you could hope. That's why it's more akin to the Ultimate Universe. It's more tangible, more grounded. And then what you're doing with the Void is you're throwing it in there. You're throwing the Void into the MCU, and all the Void wants to do is destroy. That's the only thing the Void wants to do. And like you throw that in there, you're basically throwing chaos into an organized system. And the result is that organization will become chaos. Literally, you can set your watch to it. And then in turn, you're taking that chaotic structure, that chaotic nature, and then you're giving it power that dwarfs everything we've seen so far. I mean, I would say the Void from Marvel Comics, if he was thrown in the MCU, could easily crush Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet, because the Infinity Gauntlet in Marvel Cinematic Universe is not as powerful as the one in the comics. When you're talking about someone like the Void who has like the ability to mess with reality, then you're talking about a scenario where like Thanos uses the Reality Stone and the Void's like, nope, and then undoes it. I mean, it just wouldn't work. I mean, he would just annihilate everything and everyone. You know, I mean, it would take no time at all. I mean, they would be hopelessly outmatched because it's just such an extreme display of power. But again, it's really more the chaos that the Void represents more so than anything else. I mean, if the Void became infectious and literally like went through and just started like infecting people, then it would turn the world into like a chaotic place where everybody would like fight and kill each other all the time. You know, it would be the end of days. And that's what you're talking about by throwing his character into the MCU. There's no way to win. Like there's no real way to combat it. I mean, maybe you could. I mean, they could possibly pull it off if like, because the Void is the Sentry, if they could like reason with Robert Reynolds, but we don't have any telepaths in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Even if you had a character who had like vast amounts of telepathy and could go into the mind of the Void and then bring Robert Reynolds out and get the Void under control, then there's a way to win. Then like there's a way to pull that off. But short of something like that, it's almost impossible. But here's the bonkers thing. If you guys think that's powerful, like if with all the characters we've talked about so far, all the characters we've covered so far in Too Powerful for the MCU, we've covered a lot of them. But of all the characters that we've covered so far, there's one that we haven't covered that is essentially immutable and indestructible and is nothing but pure evil. That character is the Marquis of Death. And for those of you guys who don't know, who've never heard of the Marquis of Death, to give you an example of how powerful Clyde Wincham was, in Marvel Comics, there was a point when he was annihilating entire universes with a wave of his hand, just wafting them away. And that was it. He was probably more powerful than the Living Tribunal, to be honest. Like, I mean, I would, like, if I had to create a hierarchy with the Marquis of Death, yeah, even going back and reading Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and like the Marvel Cosmic Hierarchy, I would do the One Above All and then the Marquis of Death, the Beyonders, and then the Living Tribunal. Like I would probably organize it in that fashion. But that's kind of just off the cuff. Probably have to do a little more research to see if that's actually the case or not. But yeah, no, like he was a super powerful character. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.